Hi, I'm Jeremy, the Zoo Nerd, coming to you live from my backyard in beautiful Los Angeles, California. How's everybody doing today? I hope you're well. I hope you're happy. I hope you're healthy. I hope you're staying safe, staying home. Today is a very special day. It's World Tapir Day. Tapirs are kind of a very unusual animal, and for most of my childhood I didn't really know much about them at all, and it wasn't really until I was an adult that I became much more aware of them. I do remember seeing a tapir at the San Diego Zoo when I was a little kid. We took a photo of it back in the day when you printed out photos from your camera, and we had one photo of a tapir, and that was my knowledge of a tapir growing up. As an adult, I learned a little bit more about them, and as I became more involved in the zoo community, I learned a whole lot more about them. And even further, when I became a zookeeper, I actually got to help take care of two different kinds of tapirs. And my interest and love in tapirs went from maybe down here to up here. They are a phenomenal group of animals, and they are really dynamic and extremely fun to watch, extremely fun to work with, and a very important part of their ecosystem. So today is World Tapir Day, a day created to especially raise awareness for tapirs in their home range countries, and to help those of us who don't live in a country where tapirs naturally live to learn a little bit more about them and ways that we can help them out. So if you've never seen a tapir, or if you've only seen a photo or maybe the image I put up earlier today on Instagram or Facebook, let me describe a little bit to you what they look like. First of all, they're big. They're a big animal. They look kind of like an oversized or giant pig. In working with tapirs at the zoo, people would often be very confused as to what they were looking at. Some would say a pig, some would say a bear, some would say an anteater, and it's really not closely related to any of those things. So they are a very special kind of animal. They are a large herbivore or a plant eater. They kind of look like a pig. I will definitely agree with that. They're kind of pig-shaped, kind of built like a pig. They're a little chubby, kind of like most pigs are, and their legs are kind of short compared to other animals, maybe their size. And they kind of have an elongated face with kind of a very big nose, and that gives them kind of a pig impression. Their nose is actually like a little trunk, so it's kind of like an elephant's trunk or nose, and it can do some of the same things, which is pretty amazing, although it's quite a bit smaller than what an elephant has. The tapir's nose is actually both their nose and their upper lip, and they can grab things with it. That ability is called prehensile, to be able to grab something. And that helps them to eat a lot of their food. They'll pull leaves off of plants and off of trees, and definitely go after fruit as well. They love to eat fruits, and they will pick them with their nose, with their trunk. They have been on this earth for a long time. The fossil record, so going back and studying skeletons that have been preserved in rocks and mud, dates them back at least 20 million years, maybe longer. They were a kind of animal that was very prevalent during the Ice Age. If you've ever watched the animated movies of Ice Age, if you've ever seen any of those cartoons, tapirs are one of the side characters. They're not a main character, but there's tapirs in that movie. And they were definitely very common animals around during that time frame. Also here in Los Angeles, if you've ever been to the La Brea tar pits, tapirs are also one of the animals that they found a lot of bones of tapirs in the tar near the La Brea tar pits. So they are definitely had a historical past here in the United States, in North America. Today, there are 4 species of tapirs. Some will argue that there's 5. We'll go over that in a minute. But there are 4 species officially recognized by science, and they all live in tropical areas, so places with lush vegetation, warmer temperatures. They don't like the cold very much, although one kind of does. And they typically live in, 3 of the 4 live in Central and South America. So the furthest north ranging one in the Americas is in Mexico. From about Cancun down in Mexico, there are tapirs. And then throughout most of South America, there are tapirs there. And then the other species, so the 3 of them are in the Americas, 1 is in Asia. And it's in Southern Asia, Southeast Asia, starting in Myanmar, or the country that was formerly called Burma, Thailand, Malaysia, and Indonesia. It's kind of a narrow stretch of land in Asia that kind of hangs down off of the main continent, and then Sumatra is a huge island just off the coast there that is part of the country of Indonesia. So tapirs live in the jungle primarily. They will live in some kind of swampy wetlands as well, and occasionally in some grasslands, particularly in southern Brazil and northern Argentina. They live kind of out in that grassland area. And in their habitat, they eat a lot of plants. In one study that they were studying the poop of wild tapirs, they were able to identify plant seeds from over 120 different kinds of plants, of tapirs in just one area. So they eat a wide variety of plants. And they move quite a bit. So as they're walking through their forest, they eat a little here, move on, eat a little over here, move on, eat a little over here. And as they walk through their forest and eat a bunch of different plants, they poop a lot. And as they poop, the seeds in their poop grow into new plants. So they're very important for the forests in the areas where they live because they are seed dispersers. Conservationists have regarded tapirs as nature's gardeners. So they kind of move throughout the forest, and as they poop, they plant different trees of different types of plants as they go, which is kind of great, and it's really important for their ecosystem. Areas with tapirs have a very diverse plant species in the area, and all those plants grow up to be very happy and healthy food for more tapirs and many, many other animals. So that is all very good and important. So they live, we talked about the areas that they live in. Most of them live kind of in the rainforest area. There is one species that lives a little higher up on the mountains. In the Andes Mountains, which are very tall mountains that run along the western edge of South America. And the tapirs that live there, they don't live up at the very top. They're not huge mountain climbers living in the snow kind of tapirs, but they kind of live in the mid-range of the mountains, from about 6,000 feet up to about 10,000 feet. So they're pretty high altitude, and they tend to be on more the wet side of the mountains, so the side of the mountains that have really good forests and kind of jungles growing up the forest from the Amazon up. Those are the mountain tapirs. Now tapirs have pretty big ears, and they're able to move their ears quite a bit, like other animals, especially like rhinos, who are one of their closest relatives. And with their ears, they can kind of hone in on sounds. So hearing is very important to them. They will communicate with each other through a series of sounds, most of which are kind of high-pitched whistle sounds. I have a really great video that I'll post later today of some tapirs at the Los Angeles Zoo that I worked with, making some of their vocalizations, and it's one of my favorite sounds in the world. So it's really fun to listen to. They'll also make some little grunts and snorts, particularly if they feel threatened or if they're not very happy. I've heard those sounds too. I don't know that I have recordings of those, but I'll see if I can find something. And then they also communicate through another way, and it's very important to them. It's maybe a little gross to us, but with that big nose that they have, their sense of smell is really important. That's their most important sense. That's how they find a lot of their food. That's how they can know where each other are. And as they walk through the forest, they poop and they pee on a lot of different things. And it's specifically their pee that leaves a very specific scent as they walk around. And that is a very important way that they communicate with each other. Now, tapirs usually live kind of more solitary or more alone. And scientists thought that that was absolute, that they always were alone. Recently, they've discovered that in places where there's a lot of food and a lot of water, tapirs will sometimes live in small groups, although it's a little rare. A mom with her baby, the baby usually hangs out for up to a year and a half, until the next baby comes along, and then she kind of chases off the first baby because she's like, hey, I have to take care of me, I have to take care of your younger sibling, you're out of here, go take care of yourself. But the males definitely kind of live alone most of their time, unless they're in pursuit of trying to breed with the females, then they will hang out with her until that happens. Tapirs generally kind of follow two different activity plans. They're not very active in the middle of the day. I can vouch for that in a zoo setting as well. They typically like to take a nap during the middle of the day. If it's warm out, they will definitely take a nap where it's cool. They'll lay down in the shade, they'll lay in the mud, but they especially love to soak in some water. They're not necessarily aquatic, but they are really good swimmers, and they do spend a lot of time in the water in a zoo or out in the wild. And I can't blame them on a hot day. I love to be in a pool, cool off, relax a little bit, and that's what tapirs do too. So sometimes they live in a more nocturnal or nighttime active state. And some of them are a little more kind of that in between, not daytime, not nighttime, but the crepuscular. We've talked about that with a few other animals in other critter chats. But crepuscular means that they're active in the morning when it's still pretty cool, and then they take a nap in the middle of the day when it's hot, and then they wake up again just before sunrise or sunset, and they're active again for a few hours, and then they go back to sleep. And so depending on the species of tapir and the habitat that they're living in, they may be either nocturnal or crepuscular. What else were we talking about? Oh, with their little nose too that they'll grab plants with, they can also use that as a snorkel when they're in the water, which is pretty great. So sometimes they're, especially the tapirs that live in the Amazon, in the rainforest in South America, they are often swimming across big bodies of water, and you'll just see the very top of their head with their little nose up in the air, and the rest of the tapir is kind of underwater, and they're breathing through their nose that they can kind of put up like a snorkel up over the water to help them breathe. So they are really adapted to their rainforest habitat. So let's talk a little bit about baby tapirs. A baby tapir on the cuteness level is up here. It is one of the cutest baby animals in all the world. I'll post some pictures later. Every time I see one, I just smile, I start laughing. If it's a video, it's even better. So I'll be putting some videos and photos up of baby tapirs later today. They're one of my absolute favorite things to see in the world. But a mom tapir, before the baby's born, she's pregnant, or her gestation period is 13 to 14 months, depending on the species. So that's a long time. That's more than a year. That's more than humans are pregnant for. So it's a pretty long time, but they're pretty good sized babies too. So when they're born, they're typically bigger than a human baby already when they're born. And they're born with their eyes open and covered in really amazing fur patterns. And the adults are usually kind of one color, except the tapir in Asia, it's two colors. But the babies are very distinctly colored patterns. And their pattern, although not the same color, it looks kind of like a watermelon. So they kind of have a series of stripes and spots all over their whole body, but it's in colors of like black, brown, gray, and tan, and white. And so these different colors, depending on the species, help that baby to blend in to their forest environment. If you look at how I look right now, kind of in these trees with a little bit of sun, you can see some places where the sun is a little lighter and the sun is a little darker and there's a little more shadows. That's how the baby tapirs camouflage in the forest. So the same kind of thing, but they're striped and spotted, and so that helps them to blend in underneath the low-lying plants. Because when the baby is born, although it can stand and walk within a couple of hours after birth, when the mom's going looking for food, she hides the baby. She says, "Hey baby, you stay here, I'll be back." And she takes off and goes and finds some food, and she may be gone for hours at a time, and the baby just needs to stay still and stay quiet in the forest and kind of rest until mom comes back. And then the mom will feed the baby, and as the baby grows up, it will start eating plants. But they can nurse. They're a mammal, right? So the mom produces milk that she feeds the baby, and they'll nurse up to the time where they kind of leave their mom. So usually over a year, maybe a year and a half. Okay, let's get in talking a little bit about specific species. So the biggest of all the tapirs is the tapir in Asia. That's called the Malayan tapir. And they are black and white. And they kind of have different patches. So I believe their face is black, and then it goes white, and then maybe black again. So they kind of have white, a big white section in the middle of their body with black at both their head and their rump. The babies of Malayan tapirs are kind of black and white, but striped and spotted like a watermelon. The Malayan tapirs are huge. So they can weigh up to 800 pounds. And they're not super tall. They're about 3.5 feet tall, so about to here maybe on me. But they're about 7 feet long. So they're really long and kind of lower to the ground, and pretty big around. They live, like I said, in those countries of Myanmar, Thailand, Malaysia, and the island of Sumatra in Indonesia. And they are listed as endangered. That means that they are threatened with extinction. It is estimated that there are about 2,000 of them left in the wild. Over in the Americas, the biggest of the American tapirs are the lowland or Brazilian tapirs. They're kind of a lighter brown or tan color. The thing that really sets them apart from the other tapirs is they have a really cool like mohawk mane that runs down there from just between their ears on top of their head all the way down the back of their head and neck, and it stands up pretty straight. It's very like bristly hairs, so they kind of have this little mohawk thing going on when they're adults. When they're babies, they don't have that quite yet. It comes in later. But they're the tapirs that live in Mexico and then throughout the countries of Central America, so like Panama, Nicaragua, Guatemala, Honduras, and just into the very top of Colombia and maybe Venezuela in South America. So they're kind of in that Mexico down to the top of South America range. They can be about 550 pounds, so they're still big animals, though not as big as their Asian cousins. They're about 5 feet in length, and they would be about 3 feet high. So they're a little bit shorter than their Asian cousins, but still pretty big as well. They are known as vulnerable. So they're the least threatened of the tapir species because they have, sorry, I think we got switched around in which ones I was talking about. I was talking about the ones with the mohawk. Those are the Amazon ones. So I got switched on which one I was talking about. They live in Brazil mostly, and in some of those other countries around Brazil down into Argentina. They are the biggest in the Americas. They are lighter brown or tan. They have the mohawk. They are vulnerable. We don't really know how many are out there because they live over a very big space. The other one that I was getting them confused with is the Baird's tapir. That's the one that lives in Mexico and Central America. They are more dark and reddish brown. They have white patches on their chin and on their chest. And those two are both about the same size. So that's how I got confused. I started talking about size and then switched over to the other one. So they both are about 550 pounds. They're between 5 and 6 feet long. They're about 3 feet tall. The Baird's tapirs, so the ones in Mexico and Central America, they are listed as endangered. They think there's just around 5,000 of those in a number of different countries, with Mexico probably having the most, although of the land that they're in, Mexico has the most land, so that kind of makes sense. The Brazilian ones, they are listed as vulnerable. They live in Brazil, Argentina, bits of Colombia, Venezuela, Peru, Ecuador, and Chile on the other side of the mountains. So they live in kind of and Paraguay and Uruguay. So they live in quite a few different countries and over a big expanse of land. The fourth tapir is the mountain tapir. Of the 4 officially recognized species, the mountain tapirs are the smallest. They live up on the mountains, the Andes Mountains in Western South America. They spend most of their time in the forest that is on those mountains, although occasionally they're up on some like plateau areas. And they have very dark hair. It's pretty much black. Sometimes it's a wee bit lighter and like a dark brown color. And their hair is very coarse and woolly, and it's thicker and longer than the other tapirs. So most of the tapirs have very smooth hair. If you've ever pet a horse, it's kind of like that on most of the tapirs. And on the mountain tapirs, if you've ever petted a sheep, it's kind of a little thicker hair, kind of like a sheep, but it's much more wiry. It's not as soft. So they have very thick hair. They are up around 400 pounds at the most. They're a bit shorter in height and a bit shorter in length than the others. And they live in just 3 countries, Colombia, Peru, and Ecuador, along the edge of the mountains where the mountains meet the rainforest. Now there's a possibility that there's a 5th tapir out there. And in 2013, some scientists said, hey, there's a kind of tapir we don't know about. And in 2013, that wasn't that long ago. And that's pretty crazy to say that there's a big animal out there that we don't know yet. And it's in kind of the top part of Argentina and the southwest corner of Brazil. And it's actually smaller than the mountain tapirs. And they called them Cabomani tapirs. And for like a year and a half, they said, yes, this is a new species. Then they did some genetic testing and they said, oh, maybe not. These genetically are the same as the Brazil or lowland tapirs, but this area, this more grassland area, not forested area, they don't get nearly as big. They weigh in about 350 pounds and they're a little bit shorter in length and in height. So for a while they thought that there was a 5th one, but turns out that genetically they're related to that other one in Brazil, but this area of them, they look a little different, they're smaller. So more research may be done that would prove that there may be a subspecies, or if enough research gets done, they may find that there's enough differences to call them a full different species. We're still waiting. That's the joy of science. We're still learning things. So with all of these tapirs, the Malayan tapir, the Baird's tapir, the mountain tapir, they are all endangered with varying degrees of numbers of the Malayan only having about 2,000, Baird's having about 5,000, mountain tapirs having about 2,500. And then the Brazilian tapir, we don't know how many, but they're listed as vulnerable. They are definitely more common than their other cousins, but they are still threatened or vulnerable to extinction as well. With all the tapirs in all those different countries, they face kind of the same main 3 threats. The first of which is hunting. So in a lot of these areas, the people that live in these areas are sometimes pretty poor. They don't have a lot of food, and they will often hunt animals, wild animals, for food. A tapir is a good-sized animal, so there's a lot of meat there, and it's something that they've hunted and eaten for years, although now there's more people in all those areas. So if they're continuing to hunt these animals, that is causing some problems. They also will hunt them for their hides. They have very thick skin, especially on their rump, on their back end. Their skins can be sometimes made into things like carpets that people will use in their house. Similar to like a cowhide might be used by people in decorating or in a carpet in their home. Tapir hides are sometimes used as that, or made into things like leather that can be used to make things like belts and shoes, maybe even purses in those areas. So hunting is definitely still a threat. To most of the species, the mountain tapir has received the most protection against hunting, so it's not hunted as much as the others, but historically has been as well. Habitat loss is their next big threat. That's because people are cutting down their forest, building dams, building roads. Tapirs are definitely very impacted by human disturbance. So as people move further into what was once pristine forest areas, the tapirs feel threatened or scared and they move on, or they don't have a baby that year, or there's less of them around. They sometimes get hunted, hit by cars, those kind of things. So a habitat loss is a big problem for them. And then their third threat is competition for food caused by livestock. So people raising cows, sometimes goats out in that area. They will sometimes clear the land to start raising those cows or goats or other crops, and clearing the land of the forest where the tapirs get their food has caused a lot of problems. So our special shout out today is a group called the Tapir Specialist Group. They've done a lot of really great work to help create World Tapir Day, to celebrate conservation efforts in a lot of the home range countries where tapirs live, and also to help educate people in those places as well as people around the world. They also supply funding for scientists who are studying tapirs and are doing a lot to try to figure out how many tapirs are out there. Because they're kind of a animal that lives in like ones and twos out in the forest, which is kind of hard to move through and count them. They're relying a lot on like motion cameras that they take out into the forest and strap to the trunk of a tree. And then when something activates a motion sensor, it takes a photo. But the scientists then have to go back and collect the photo disc and bring those back in and check the batteries and make sure that all that's working. So the Tapir Specialist Group, they run the website tapir.org. They have some good information. I'll post that later today. So my experience with tapirs, like I said at the beginning, really went from kind of a down here level when I was a kid to not really knowing what they were or not being too interested in them, to up to here when I became a zookeeper and started working with them. So as I was training to become a zookeeper at the Los Angeles Zoo, I first got introduced to the Baird's tapirs. The LA Zoo in a few years ago, I think it was in 2014, opened a new exhibit complex called Rainforest of the Americas. And they created a new habitat that's glorious for tapirs. And they have a pair of Baird's tapirs, hoping to someday have babies. But when they brought their Baird's tapirs in, they were both still pretty young, so they weren't quite old enough to have babies yet. They, to my knowledge, have not had success in having a baby still, but possibly someday they will. But their habitat is really cool, and I really enjoyed working around the Baird's tapirs. Now, because they're still a pretty big animal, and despite them being plant eaters, most tapirs have some pretty good teeth, including a pretty sharp tooth in their mouth. And because they're big and they are pretty fast, and they have some sharp teeth, we don't work in the same space as most tapirs. So with working with the Baird's tapirs, we always worked through a protected contact. So I didn't get to know them quite as well as I did their cousins that I took care of a few years later. But the Baird's tapirs were really cool to observe and work with during my training time to become a zookeeper. After I became a zookeeper, one of the animals I got trained to help take care of are the mountain tapirs. And they're the smaller ones with the very woolly coat with the dark hair. And the Los Angeles Zoo is one of only 2 zoos in the United States, the other one being the Cheyenne Mountain Zoo in Colorado Springs. Those are the only 2 zoos in the US that currently have mountain tapirs. And they're really rare in captive situations. I believe those are the only 2 zoos outside of Peru, Ecuador, and Colombia where mountain tapirs live. I could be wrong on that, but I know that they're the only 2 in the US that have mountain tapirs. At the LA Zoo, I worked with 3 different mountain tapirs. They were all siblings, so they were all born at the LA Zoo, the oldest of which was 22. And then she had a brother who was, maybe she was 23, 21, and 19, I believe, were their ages of the 3 that I worked with. They can live about 30 years in a zoo, so they can have a pretty long time. Or that's like the record is in the 30s. So they may not live quite that long. But all three of these tapirs were born at the LA Zoo like 20 years ago. They're really cool tapirs, really great animals to work with. And with the mountain tapirs, they're a little smaller, they're a little slower, and they really love people. So as a zookeeper, they were one of the animals that we got to go into their space with in working around them. And the thing that they loved more than anything, you could give them treats, or you could give them branches off of trees that they really like to eat, or you could give them, they had a pool that they could swim in, you could turn on a waterfall for them. But better than all of that, the thing that they loved the most was to get scratched by people. They loved to be petted and scratched, especially around their ears and under their, right where their legs meet their chest, kind of their armpit. They absolutely loved to get scratched, and they would often lay down so you could scratch on their belly. It was always a favorite thing of mine when I got to work with the mountain tapirs, was to be able to work with them and scratch them. It was really fun. It was very rewarding because you could tell they really enjoyed it. When we would go in the morning to start cleaning, they would often follow us around until you would scratch them. So you'd have to start scratching them and then do some cleaning, and then scratch them again, then clean up some more, then bring them some food and scratch them again. But they were absolute delight to work with. I also have a little video of a mountain tapir eating that I'll put up later today too. They're really fun with their little trunk nose. They can kind of pick up some of their food and put it in their mouth, kind of like an elephant does. So that was always fun to watch at the zoo during my time as a zookeeper at the Los Angeles Zoo. I hope you've enjoyed what I've shared with you about tapirs today. Look for more information coming up soon onto the Facebook profile. And also this full video will be uploaded later today onto YouTube and Facebook. We'll see what Instagram does today. It works some days, it doesn't work others. So we'll see if I can upload the full video on Instagram TV. We'll see how that goes. But until tomorrow, take care of yourself, have fun, be happy, be healthy, and I'll see you tomorrow. Thanks, bye.